as we open our eyes to really see what's going on in our families and our churches and our environments, we have this responsibility now to not just see it and brush it under the rug, but actually do something with it, to actually help change the culture, which is currently normalizing abuse, and bring in some more higher vibrations and some more love and change the way that things are going. Today's guest is Karen Tate, and she is a thought leader, a speaker, a 7 times published author, and activist. And she's going to get you really revved up to get out there and start making an impact with what you're seeing in the world, changing our pervasive culture of abuse and bringing in more love. So join us to find out more.
Soul Nectar Show, the Soul Nectar Show. You're invited, delighted to discover who you are. Anything is possible if you believe. So join us on this beautiful journey. Soul Nectar Show, Soul Nectar Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Nectar Show, that show where we talk about all things essence, where we gather around the campfire and we share our stories of connection to that which is greater than us, to the great mystery beyond the veil, to those synchronistic moments that lead us inexorably towards a deeper understanding of who we are and what we're doing here on planet Earth and what this whole construct is really all about. I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird, and I love having these conversations week after week and inviting you to join us and contribute your thoughts too, because I'd love to hear what you think. And so shoot me an email, send me a message on social, and I'd love to connect with you and see what you think about all these conversations. And today is going to be another one of those conversations that could stir up some real thoughts and about your life and where you are in the conversation of abuse. I know that our world is just teeming with different ways of feeling abused. We have emotional abuse, we have physical abuse, we have mental abuse, we have psychotic abuse, we have psychological abuse, we have energetic abuse, we have, how many ways? And here's really the invitation is in your life. I love this conversation with Don Miguel Ruiz in his book, The 4 Agreements. And he says, that we'll tolerate a relationship, an abusive relationship, just so long as it abuses us less than we abuse ourselves. And the moment that we're abused more than we abuse ourselves, we say no to that relationship and we walk away and we find a new way of being or a new relationship. We say, no, thank you. That's more than I abuse myself. So now I need to leave. And so for me, as soon as I read that, I thought, well, then the goal I have is to abuse myself less and less and less and less and less until, who am I going to be in a relationship with? But that's another question. But how can I abuse myself even less? How can I be more kind, more loving, more gentle to myself and then therefore be able to then give that to others? And definitely, if you're listening to this, you've been listening to lots of conversations throughout the years. And right now we're moving towards more sovereignty. We're moving out of the victim consciousness and into sovereignty and into an understanding of ourselves beyond this idea of abuse. And yet here it is pervasive in our world. And so where do we stand with on that skinny branch between what is becoming and what is right now? And so today we're going to have a beautiful conversation, I'm quite positive, with my guest, Karen Tate. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so glad you're here. And Karen is a thought leader. She's a speaker. She's a 7 times published author and activist. And her work is at the crossroads of spirituality, personal transformation, and social justice. She's the hostess of the long-running Voices of the Sacred Feminine podcast, considered a treasure trove of wisdom for more than a dozen years. It's just a long time to be having a podcast. This one's been going for 7 years, so I can really appreciate one that's been going for 12 years. She has been a caring economy conversation leader and a power partnership presenter with the Center of Partnership Studies. And she also went to my alma mater and got a certification in psychology of political activism, women changing the world. I can so respect that. From Smith College, beautiful. And been on lots and lots of different places. We're going to put all of the details about Karen's experiences, which are extensive, in the show notes, so that you guys can take a look at that at your leisure. And just letting you know, like, her newest book, which prompted this interview, is called Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on our pervasive culture of abuse, and that got published in January 2023. So really excited to have you here. I know that you've also published lots of books, Karen, about the goddess, lots of deep work you've done with Sacred Feminine. And so really looking forward to seeing what you have to share with us. I know that you're also an interfaith minister. So that's another aspect, like really being inclusive. So how did you get to be on this path? I mean, all of these wonderful gifts and wisdom that you're here to share with us today. Where do you want to share about your journey to bring us up to speed with who you are as we launch off into our deep conversation, which I know we're about to have?
Okay, well, I'll start with the fact that I was born in New Orleans, which is the Bible Belt. And, you don't hear about much of what I'm going to talk about today, whether it be abuse or the goddess and the Bible Belt. It took my leaving Louisiana and moving to California for my mind to expand and these ideas to sort of puncture the bubble that I lived in. And I want to tell you, I grew up your typical Southerner. Um, we didn't learn about slavery and the Civil War. We didn't, racism was an everyday occurrence. It was just normal. We considered this all normal because we had no one to tell us otherwise. And so I'm sharing this as an example that people can really change when they're exposed to new information. But that is so important, to be exposed to new information, which I was in California, where we moved. And I will say, though, when I was living in the Bible Belt, I grew up a Catholic, but religion didn't really sink its teeth into me real deep. I was really interested in ancient cultures, and you'd find me reading books on ancient Egypt and, people around the world. And I think that kept the door open for me to, sort of expand my horizons. And when I moved to California, I discovered this. I stumbled onto a class about the goddess, and as I look back on it now, it was probably a fluff class. It didn't get into the important stuff I learned later, but it cracked the door open even wider. And that old saying, when the teacher appears when the student is ready. Well, that was so true for me. And I will forever be in debt to the women who taught me about the sacred feminine. And at first, it was just discovering that, yes, there was a feminine face of God. Because, growing up a Catholic, again, in the Bible Belt, the only female image you saw was Mary. But, Mary was just this passive, loving, sort of intermediary, maybe between you and God. At the most, she wasn't. We weren't taught that maybe she was a social justice activist or anything like that. And so I didn't grow up with any female faces of God that could have um, affected my psyche to the point where maybe I had a better self-esteem. And I realize now, when young women or grow up with the idea of a feminine face of God, it's a totally different experience for them. They grow up and they're more independent. They have a better set of values about themselves. And so it started there. I just discovered that there was a feminine face of God. And then I realized, well, there was a feminine face of God all around the world, and for thousands and thousands of years. So I just did a really deep dive and really educated myself. And then before you know it, I married my passion for travel with this new passion of the sacred feminine. And my husband and I traveled across 5 continents visiting sacred sites of Goddess. A lot of them were not in travel books. We had to find them ourselves. But it really changed my life to stand in these sacred sites. Sometimes it was an archaeological site. Sometimes it was a museum that housed all her artifacts. Sometimes it was a place where a church had been built on top of her temple. Sometimes it was a sacred grove. But it meant so much to me to actually stand in these sacred places where Goddess had been revered so many years ago, and in many cases is still revered today. So that was sort of a little bit of the background. And then I started understanding Goddess as more than just a deity that people look to and maybe pray to, like I learned to pray to, the male god. And I started understanding her as a role model for women. And then I understood her as a set of values. And it became this big umbrella that so much fit under. And as I learned more and more, I became a social justice activist with sort of Goddess as that parallel track, because in my mind, so many of the values and ideals of the sacred feminine are what we need to manifest a new normal and change the world.
Yeah, the new normal and change the world. The feminine archetypes and the feminine energies. Really important to bring those forward at this time. We've kind of reached the end of the efficacy of simply going by the male energies, right? The penetration energies, the thrusting, the logic based, the mind based, all of those forward hoe energies are, like now it's like, why don't we stop and review,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I learned that, we live in patriarchy. And I mean, it wasn't even a word that entered my psyche when I lived in the South. And then you learn that, well, the 4 legs of the stool of patriarchy, or capitalism, racism, sexism, environmental exploitation. You realize how we have grown up to obey male authority. And what does that do for women, except make them secondary, less than, their lives restricted. And, it feels like, as I've been doing my podcast over the years, it was interesting. I was going through a lot of the old shows recently to save them. And 10 years ago, we were still talking about the same topics, but in some cases, the situation has gotten worse. We haven't done a lot of steps forward, but we have done some steps back. But I think, more people are starting to awaken to the idea that, we are normalizing way too much abuse in our society. But some people are still they're not aware of it. I mean, I've talked to women's circles, and we'll bring up abuse and exploitation, and they'll say, well, I don't have any of that in my life. And we'll go, well, what about, oh, yeah, yeah. We've just become so numb and in denial. I think we've buffered ourselves from reality and the horrors of the trauma, simply to survive. I mean, I had one person who contributed to my book, and one of her quotes is, "We endure abuse to survive." And I think that's still the case for many of us. And, it was really a deep dive for me to do this book, Normalizing Abuse, because by this point in my life, I considered myself a social justice activist. And my husband and I went through some personal trauma, because prior to our personal trauma, I thought I was mostly talking about other people. but he fell and hit his head and incurred a brain injury. I was assaulted by someone wielding a stun gun. And what we went through during the course of our healing and just reflection during that period, it really opened my eyes to this abuse and exploitation on so many other levels that I had even stuffed in my own head, things that happened in my own life. And I think we all do it. And so much of what's going on around us, we don't even recognize as abuse and exploitation, So I don't know how much you want to go into that, but I mean, it's simply all around us, and we don't even see it anymore. It's like a fish swimming in water that they don't see. And I think until we actually raise our awareness and start to push back against this, it's going to continue. We have to, I think, have some much firmer boundaries in our lives than we actually do. We've tolerated an awful lot that we really shouldn't be tolerating.
Yeah, I mean, my window into this denial space is the conversations I have with my friend Kertrice about racism and about dismantling racism and how a lot of people are kind of ostrich in the sand. Like, I don't really want to look at that. I don't, it's over, it was done 100 years ago. So I don't need to talk about that, or it's not happening now. And it's really a lot of denial, because as soon as you have black skin, you realize it's still happening. It's happening a certain place. It's happening all over the place in some degree or another. And so in order to change that, we have to be able to educate ourselves. And so, yeah, what we're not aware of, we don't change, right? We only change what we're aware of. As soon as we become aware of something, now we have the awareness. And so I've actually spoken with people even who are African American and are Christian, and they're like, I don't want to know anything about that. And it's because they know that the minute they know it, they're going to be aware of it. And once you're aware of it, you got to do something with it, because once you know better, you got to do better. And so I think a lot of people are in the game of, I don't know anything, like, don't tell me. I don't want to know.
It's more comfortable, right? It makes it easier for us to sit on the couch. I was teaching a class, Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. It's a Unitarian Universalist class. And what you just said actually came up in the class. We took a break, and this young woman came up to me in tears and said, Karen, I know everything you're saying to me is accurate and true. She said, but I just can't listen to it anymore. She said, because I know if I try to make any changes in my life, I'm going to be going up against my parents, my husband, my in-laws. She said, and it's painful for me to hear this. She said, I really just have to go. And of course, I blessed her and wished her well, but I know she could not unhear what she heard. And I think about her often and wonder, what small changes she might have been able to make moving forward, because we can't just jump in and turn our life upside down oftentimes. But the first step is being willing to look at it and not be in denial. And then we can start planning some strategies. I know when I was writing the book, the Normalizing Abuse book, I actually put a call out to people to tell me some of their experiences of abuse in the workplace, in academia, in religion, in society and culture, family and friends, corporations, all of these different aspects of society, because all of those are covered in the book to a certain degree. And I think the ones that came up the most often was abuse in the workplace and abuse by friends and family, and I think, those to a certain extent, especially friends and family, those are the most insidious, because we trust those people to have our back, and so often they maybe don't have our back. And then there's maybe a culture of silence in the family that you can't talk about it, or the workplace. How often do you have an employer who is, you might be getting tips, but you don't have an hourly wage or you don't have any benefits, and you're supposed to be able to live on that? Well, that's exploitation, and some people say, well, that's the way it is, that's the way it's always been. Well, that doesn't make it right. And there's so many different examples of that. Employers that put their employees in unsafe working conditions, who expect them to break the law, and maybe they don't even know they're breaking the law. I mean, there are just so many things. And I think sometimes when people hear about abuse, they automatically think maybe domestic violence. But this goes so far beyond that, so far beyond that. I mean, I've had gay professors write me and say their theories never saw the light of day because the powers that be in academia, they were homophobic, and then they moved to a different university and they have incredible success because the academia there weren't homophobic and held their work back simply because they were gay. I mean, the stories just go on and on and on, but we have just tolerated so much, including our sanitized, view of our history, even in the United States.
Yeah, the sanitized history. I live in Texas, and so I'm very aware of the recent legislation to, you know, make language around enslaved people as to say they were unpaid workers, things like this, so that the white children don't have to feel bad about themselves. And I think that the white children are going to feel really bad about their parents lying to them when they discover it on the internet that, what actually happened. I think what's going to happen is that the white kids are going to feel really betrayed by their parents who tried to hide this information. And because guess what? Black people are not going to stop talking about it. It's not going to get less quiet. It's not going to get more silent about that. It's going to get louder. And so in the process of it getting louder, watching that the people that are supposedly looking out for your best interest, so that you turn out to be a really good human, kind of hiding all that information from you, doesn't really speak very well to the people that are leading the school systems or leading the state, right?
True. Or, it's so crazy if you just think about it. But some people have lost the ability to use critical thinking. I mean, that's a whole nother subject. But you think, they're trying to ban books in schools or not teach children about, the economics of slavery and the Civil War, because they're afraid their kids are going to feel shame. I mean, seriously, are we snowflakes that, we are so weak in our mind that, we can't hear our real history? That's absurd to me. And also this idea about now the big thing is drag shows. Drag shows are going to somehow hurt our children, but AR-15s won't, right?
Right. No gun controls, but we want to control what people are doing with their sexuality. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, or women can die in the hospital now because doctors are afraid to maybe perform medical procedures that'll save a woman's life. But we have to protect our children from books and men who dress like women or women who dress like men. It's just it's really crazy. And I just hope more and more people see it for the absurdity that it is, because this is really about controlling people's minds. And having lived in the South, I mean, look, I am so ashamed to say I used to listen to Fox News. I used to think Rush Limbaugh was a smart guy, and I didn't have anything to counter that. And it really scares me that so many people still today don't. And I'm hoping this Dominion lawsuit changes the way networks like Fox News do business, because the media is supposed to be the fourth estate. The fourth estate is supposed to protect democracy. And they are not doing that. They are destroying democracy with lies and disinformation. And, you know, I can only hope that all of this that's coming to light right now, more and more people get access to it so they can also say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right, and give them a chance to hear the other side, you know, and make the changes that are necessary to be a functioning and aware member of society to make the world a better place, not a worse place.
What you're actually pointing to is a kind of a systemic cultural gaslighting. And so, how do you help somebody to find their way through all that gaslighting when they've been systematically disempowered from accessing their intuitive powers and not trusting any of their own intuition or what their body's telling them? They've been trained to not trust that and to think that that is from like the devil or something like that. And so how do you actually wake people up to the gaslighting when the tool that they would use in order to detect the gaslighting has also been, made afraid of that tool, which is their body, which is their intuitive power? What do you say to that? How do we help people?
Well, what I had an interesting experience that gave me a little bit of an insight. I don't profess to be an expert on this, but from my personal experience, when my husband hit his head and I was attacked, it resulted in us losing our job that we had. We were a management team. And because we didn't have an income when we were both out of work and disabled, we were forced to leave Los Angeles. And we lived in a very isolated place that was very conservative because it was affordable. And I started, if I wanted to have any contact with other human beings, I was thrust into an environment where people didn't think like me. They thought like the people I grew up with thought. And I started to see these people in a very different light, actually. I started to see them as people who very much wanted the very same things as me. And I approached them from that standpoint. And what started to happen was, trust began to be developed, one-on-one almost, and I didn't at first reveal everything about who I was, but slowly I did. Now, I'm not saying that opened, up a lot of doors, but on a one-to-one basis, I think sometimes we can make headway. I think we have to expose people to other ideas through maybe people that they trust, or through avenues that, like for instance, I know TikTok has got a bad name right now, but if we use resources to reach people with alternative ideas, then they can get exposure to something else. And I know some of these more conservative people would have conversations with me, and I could see they had aha moments, and I think that's really what we have to do. We have to look for ways like your show and my show to try to reach out, and get this message to people and pierce their bubbles. And that's going to look different in different places, but definitely disparaging them is not going to work. I think we have to reach them from a place of common ground, things that we all want, a secure future, a job that, pays us enough to pay the bills. We want our children to be safe. We want to, our vote to count. We want to be able to vote. We don't want people incarcerated who are not guilty, things like that. And because there's a lot, I think, that we have in common with these other people, but the powers that be have purposefully divided us. This divide and conquer strategy, obviously. I think with women, women have to learn, have to be put in situations where we can learn to support one another rather than, being divided by classism, racism, competition for a man or a job or opportunities. I think it's finding ways to see our common humanity, because in the end, I really do believe we want the same things. And if we can, talk to each other about that rather than the flashpoints, the things that trigger, then I think we can start to make headway and, open people's minds to ideas that maybe they didn't hear because they were in their bubble.
Yeah, and because they're in the bubble, right? And we're all in our own version of that bubble. We're not really aware, let's say, that something's abusive. Like we might just, it's like you said, it's normalized. We're not aware that it's actually something abusive because we're in a overall mentality that dismisses people and isn't a very heart open space. Maybe if we all had a chance to go spend a couple of weeks in a really heart open spiritual center with a lot of other yogis and people like that, and we all suddenly had this experience of being loved and cared about, we would then all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, like this is love, this is care. And now I know that what I was experiencing before isn't actually love and care. So maybe we need to be like that moving, roaming yogi experience, like
Well, I
around
agree.
new environments, right?
Yeah, and be open to new environments, because research has shown us that, and I hate to make a generalization, I'm just, quoting the study that I read, but conservative people have a smaller amygdalas. And people who have smaller amygdalas, they tend to be fear-based. So they don't try new things. They feel more comfortable living inside their comfortable, familiar box. So it's harder for them to step outside that box. But this idea of love and this idea of yogis, and I mean that's all great, but let's just take it back to the church, okay? Because I grew up, a Catholic, and I'm thinking about prosperity gospels for one thing. I'm thinking about Christian nationalism. Um, Once Roosevelt started our social safety net of Social Security, corporations started working on Christianity, and we end up with prosperity gospels. They started tearing away at the social safety net. And what we have today, I mean, and that's, just sort of a thumbnail explanation. I mean, there's a lot more detail and nuance to it. But the point is, instead of the church, teaching, the teachings of Jesus about love and, taking care of the lesser among us and all of that, we don't hear that so much anymore. We hear prosperity gospels. We see ministers on televised on TV with their own private jets, right? There was the guy down in Houston when the city was flooding. Did he open up his mega church to people? No, he didn't. He was worried about the carpet being, destroyed because of the water and the people traipsing through. What I'm trying to say is, I think, if we got back to the teachings of Jesus rather than prosperity gospels, where it's a sign of Jesus's love, the more wealth you accumulate, the more assets you have. I mean, it's a distortion. I mean, I really do believe Christianity has gaslit people into thinking that wealth and assets are a way to prove Jesus loves us, as opposed to how are we in service. I am what I do, versus I am what I have. It's about the we and the us, not the I and the me. And so I think, if we could get a movement back in Christianity, to sort of push aside the prosperity gospels, to see women as equal instead of, male authority figures trying to hold on to that power. I mean, I think there's a lot that could be done within the church, but it would take, it would take a rethinking, of what's being taught there. But if I, I mean, the Pew Institute says that, churches are in decline, even evangelical churches are in decline. And I think if they were to maybe rethink their message, it would do a lot toward helping society grow up and heal and not be so divisive. But right now, they're just an instrument for patriarchy, authoritarianism, and sexism, racism. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what's happened is the opposite of what Jesus preached, as far as I can tell. And I'm
Yeah.
not raised in that system, but I take a look at it from the outside and go, well, I'm pretty sure that's not what Jesus said. And yet here's the entire institution built around these false promises.
Yeah.
And people clinging to it is in a very righteous way, and I think righteousness is kind of a dangerous spot. Anytime we get righteous about something, we're on a pedestal or placing ourselves on a pedestal, we can easily be knocked off, right? And so that, to me, being a humble human is the medicine, right? And maybe that's what's happening. The exodus from the church is people need to lose that sort of righteousness and to be humbled into not knowing anymore, and then to find something new. And then once you don't know the answers to everything, you get to learn. That's the beauty of not knowing, right? Is to be in the void of not knowing and to be in that uncomfortable spot of, I'm not really sure what's true anymore.
Well, and I think too, a lot of these people are looking to the guy in the pulpit to tell them what to think. And I think they really have to start thinking for themselves because, there's an awful lot of guys in the pulpit who we often find are, abusing children, maybe abusing women or men or young men in their communities. And what happens? It's unfortunate. What happens when they're found out? We'll find that maybe that there were enablers in the church that knew about it all along, that didn't do anything about it. Or we find that the community, in so many cases, will stand behind the priest or the minister and victimize the victim. We really have to look at so many of these things because this idea of male authority being absolute, it's done so much damage. I mean, like right now, I think there is a movement afoot to look into Jeffrey Epstein's enablers, and the banks that knew that the money that was being funneled, through Jeffrey Epstein, that, some of those banks knew about what he was doing. And Weinstein, at least, Weinstein is in jail now. Epstein was in jail. We're making smaller steps toward, I think, holding people accountable, but there's so much more accountability, I think, that needs to be had. There's so many people have gotten away with so much and still do, at the expense of others, whether we're talking about, corporations or government or the media or, just things that are just normal in society and culture. I think we have to find the moral courage to not wear blinders. And if we have the opportunity to say something, speak truth to power.
Yeah. And so is this part of what you're talking about in your new book and normalizing abuse? Is this the range of topics that you're addressing inside the book?
It is, and I actually start the foreword is by Matthew Fox, and I don't know if your listeners will know Matthew Fox. He was excommunicated from the Vatican decades ago. He is an incredible. He's still a minister today. He is out there. He's been speaking truth to power for decades. He wrote the foreword, and I start off actually talking about my own life. And, how I realized in my first Saturn return, it was about changing and transforming the external elements of my life. And at my second Saturn return, as I was, going through this reflection period when I was recovering from the stun gun incident and helping my husband recover from his brain injury, the second Saturn return was more of an internal transformation. And I start the book out explaining that I was wearing blinders to a lot of things that happened in my life, and I talk about that, and we get into all of these different aspects of our lives where abuse and exploitation is going on, but yet we don't call it that. We just accept it as normal. And I reached out and got contributors to actually send commentary about abuses and exploitations that happened to them. So it's peppered throughout with short snippets of personal real life examples. I get into how can you recognize trauma in your life? How can you heal yourself from the trauma that's a result from abuse and exploitation? I talk about whistleblowers, and I sort of put on my everyday woman's social science hat and started to study why, as humans, we do the things that we do and allow ourselves to sort of get sucked up into these these bad actions that can not just hurt ourselves but hurt others. And then, of course, toward the end, it's about ways we can change our personal lives and things we can do out in the greater society to maybe start making a difference. And, like a pebble in the pool, these ideas and these actions, they have a wave action and reach out beyond ourselves.
So, as we become aware of some things, maybe in our environment or where things are not as equitable as they could be, or where we realize that they're quite abusive, actually, or they're violent how we're behaving, we didn't even know that was violent to behave that way. What are some things you recommend for how to transition into a new way?
Well, I think when we see something, that expression, we have to say something. I think we really do, whether it's at our children's school, or whether it's in the family, or whether it's in the workplace. I don't think we can continue to be complicit in the action with our silence, and it can be a lot of different things, depending on the circumstances you're encountered with. We talked earlier about, the book bannings, for instance. Well, what's happening at the local level in your kid's school? What's happening at the workplace? What things do you think are unfair? And if they're legitimately unfair, then maybe you or a group of people can get together and make a statement and try to change things within your own family, within your own school, within your own workplace. Maybe it's at your church. You find that maybe your church isn't as welcoming as it should be. Maybe they're not really practicing the values of Jesus. Maybe you can look into offering a Sunday service yourself on a particular topic, teaching Sunday school yourself. It's about, getting involved. We can't just sit on the couch and expect to make a difference unless maybe you're writing postcards, or letters to the editor, or somehow you're trying to affect change from where we sit. And, or maybe it's just volunteering for groups that already have a mission that you resonate with. I mean, there's so much going on out there. It's about reconciling your spirituality and your politics. I mean, I can't tell you the women who told me that they cared about the earth and they cared about women's rights, but then they turn around and vote for Republicans who don't believe in climate change, or who are supporting candidates that, are against, women having a right to their own body. I mean, we have to um, think things through, from the pulpit to the voting booth to our job. And, maybe if we have a choice between jobs, we don't work for a company that's, raping and pillaging the earth, or a company that somehow, doesn't treat their employees well, like, Walmart or Kmart. We work someplace else that has a better record of human rights or employee rights. There's so many ways we could actually do it if we just stop and think. When we see something that isn't right, don't tolerate it, even if it just means not going along with it for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And it requires being educated, so it requires continuing to educate yourself about the politics, about the different companies and where you buy things from and how they treat people. And you might not become aware of that until your young adult starts working at some of these places and then gives you the feedback direct, like this is the way they treat us over here. And a lot of young people are at my son's age, early 20s, are not sticking with jobs, and people are saying all these horrible things about them. And if you actually listen to what they say, they're not being treated well, and that's why they're leaving the jobs, is because they're not being treated well. And so I think that's a disruptor to our idea about these companies and how they operate. And we need to keep our eyes open and go, oh, they're not treating people well over there. That's why my son is not staying there, is because he's not being treated well. And he's not going to stay someplace he's not being treated well, because I taught him not to stay places that he's not treated well.
Right, right.
Right.
And
So
your son is lucky that he had a mom to tell him that, but there are people that think, well, I'll do anything I have to do to keep the paycheck. And that's really not the right mentality if you have any other choice.
yeah, and I think that requires us to take our blinders off. I mean, and the blinders meaning like how we were taught to be. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I was really taught like just get through it, just like keep your job and keep your paycheck and just keep doing it and just do your best and just, just kind of like let it roll off your back. And I was taught, like it's more important to just keep the job and to have it for a certain amount of time so that you're not like one of these people that's always flaking and leaving, right? Like I was taught that. But even I got into these workplaces and I thought, this is too much. I don't like this. It's not fun. I'm not enjoying myself. And so I became an entrepreneur, right? And so we have the internet, guys. I mean, you don't have to stick at jobs that don't serve you. You can leave and do your own thing and somebody will pay you for it. So I think it's that faith and trust, following your intuitive center. And if your church is making you feel bad because of how they're talking about things, then maybe you don't need to be at that church. Maybe you need to be someplace else if they're being hateful towards a certain group. Maybe that's not a place for you to stay. You need to go someplace else. Yeah.
But, and I mean, and look, and Google is an incredible thing, for all the pitfalls of, social media and all of that. You can easily go online and see if there have been lawsuits against companies, for discriminating against different groups of people. I mean, I think it was Chick-fil-A that was anti-gay. They wouldn't hire anyone, that was gay. There are apps that you can go online, and as you're walking through the grocery store, if you don't want to support corporations that give all of their money to, say, Republicans or Democrats, whichever way, you can decide, well, I'm not going to buy this brand because, they give to the political party that I'm against, or I remember when the Koch brothers were a big name in media, because, they were using all of their money to influence politics. These apps were out there and you could see all the products that the Koch brothers created in the grocery store, and you could actually hurt them with their, in their pocketbook. Or I remember one of the Fox News one of their big commentators got kicked off the air because people started writing the advertisers and didn't want them advertising on Fox News during this guy's show. And he ended up, he heard Fox's bottom line, and he was costing him too much money with, paying hush money and all of that sort of stuff. We ended up getting rid of this guy on Fox News because people out there letter writing campaign to the advertisers of the show. Imagine now that all of this has come out, that Fox News knew that the election wasn't stolen. Imagine if everybody, wrote the people who advertise at Fox and say, I'm no longer going to buy your product if you keep advertising with Fox, because a media company should not be allowed to put out disinformation that destroys the country. It's that simple. And it's amazing to me that some people could think that that's okay. That they could be allowed to lie and misinform the vast majority of people in the United States, and there be no accountability for that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that your main thrust here through the whole conversation is accountability, and I think that's definitely what we've lost a lot of is accountability, and that's because accountability is uncomfortable. You have to actually keep educating yourself. You have to stay on top of things. You have to listen. You have to be willing to have conversations you don't want to have. You have to do uncomfortable things like stop using brands you like because you don't want to support their politics. There's a lot to, but you have to decide what's more important to you. Right?
Yeah.
What's the most important thing? Do you want to have an empowered world where everybody has equity? What's your value system? And once you know your value system, and everybody listening to me on this broadcast, we're pretty much all agreeing the value system is equity, right? The value system is the planet, and what's good for the planet is what we want to do. These are things where we need to actually be holding things like people accountable and brands accountable, and we actually need to actually speak our truth and get aligned and take action to support that.
Well, and you can look at my advice from the standpoint of look at all the things we can actually do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that and companies don't like bad press. That's the wonderful thing about
Yeah.
about companies is they don't like bad press, and neither do politicians. So, if you start actually digging in with a little bad press, then you might actually change some behaviors.
Well, yeah. And just on the news today, you had millions of people out in the street over the last few weeks in Israel. They're fighting against their government who wants to change laws that would make it so that the leader of the country would control the judicial system. And they know that'll lead to the end of their democracy. There's millions of people out in the street. There's millions of people out in the street in Paris and different places in France because the government wants to raise the retirement age. There are more of us than there are of them, and instead of letting ourselves be divided, by race, by gender, by religion, we really ought to be holding the people that really need to be held accountable rather than continuing to let them divide and conquer us, because we will be the losers. In the United States right now, there are 300 people who have as much wealth as the rest of us in the whole entire country. Let that sink in for a minute.
That's obscene.
That's obscene. And my new mantra is a traumatized nation elects abusers to office. A traumatized nation elects abusers to office. And we look around at some of the people who are in office right now, or want to be in office again. We can just, I think it's like a litmus test for where we are as a nation, because I think we are traumatized. We've been through a lot. You think back, we went through 9/11, we went through, the pandemic. We went through 4 years of Trump and, every day something new on Twitter. We are a traumatized nation. We've had an economic collapse. People wages have not kept up with the cost of living. Some people are still making $7 an hour minimum wage, $7 an hour, and we can't get that raised. We were looking at guns. We talked about that before. They're worried about banning books and drag shows, but not AR-15s that can, just blow a person's body to smithereens to the point where they're unrecognizable. It's just crazy. And we really just need to heal ourselves, self-care, and then volunteer wherever we can, in the area that is our biggest passion, I think, and really try to make a difference.
Beautiful. So everyone, let's take a nice deep breath for that. That's a lot. Take a breath. We make a lot of different decisions when we're grounded, we're present, we're safe. We make a lot of different decisions from that sacred feminine space, actually, from that beautiful inner womb space that connected with the planet, Mother Earth, beautiful Mother Earth can show us the way through all of this mayhem and chaos and turbulence and all that.
That is it, isn't it? It's the sacred feminine, and her values that some would try to convince us are weak, but they aren't. It's about generosity, it's about gratitude, it's about compassion, it's about empathy. It's about our intuition, it's about equality, it's about justice, um, having healthy boundaries, all of these things that are the sacred feminine. It's about, I believe it's about also about being in service, rather than greed. You look at the goddess, the Inuit goddess. I'm trying to think of her name right now. Sedna. Thank you, Sedna. I look at her as the environmental goddess. Her myth is, she is the gatekeeper of the animals of the sea. And she allows man to utilize the animals of the sea for food, their blubber for oil, maybe their bones for tools. But if man gets greedy and takes more than they need, she cuts him off and she says, no more. So hers is a great myth to teach us about greed. The goddess Isis, you look at Isis, and it is by Isis that the pharaoh has the authority to rule. And you'll see these inscriptions on temple walls where you see Isis with the goddess Ma'at in her hand, and she's handing Ma'at to the pharaoh. And she's saying, yes, I will give you the right to rule, but you will rule using the ideals and the values of Ma'at, which are basically social justice, and we have all of these goddesses that can show us the way, that are beacons for right action and personal transformation. The goddess Sekhmet, the lion-headed Egyptian goddess, I look to her for strength, for courage, for tenacity. I ignore the myth that's out there about her because I think where she becomes a mercenary for her father Ra is really just patriarchal propaganda. And you look at the fact that she is a mother and she is a healer, and she is, her son is the patron of doctors, her consort is the god of builders, of creation. And you can look at Sekhmet as a lioness, and you think about how lionesses work with one another. They work in partnership to take care of the cubs of the pride. It's not about competition. It's not about excess. It's about partnership. And really, I love the writings of Riane Eisler, and she taught me a long time ago that really everything comes down to it's either about partnership or it's about domination. And if we can be in partnership with everything in our lives, that's the road toward thriving and success and healing, rather than this patriarchal dominator system that we live in, this predator capitalist system of domination. And I think when, no matter what the circumstance is, if we look at it and we say, is this about partnership? Is this creating win-win situations for everybody? Or is this about domination where it's about, winners and losers rather than win-win situations? Then I think we can very quickly see, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Should I support this or should I not support this?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Good strategy for determining the efficacy of different choices that need to be made.
Yeah.
Calling in those goddesses, and definitely going to be referring people to your new book. Again, that new book is Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on our pervasive culture of abuse. That was published in January 2023, and there's lots of other titles. If you look up Karen Tate on Amazon, you'll find lots of other titles. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your passion and your wisdom. I really appreciate that. And I want to encourage anybody to share this episode out with whoever you think would benefit from hearing these messages in today's broadcast. And please like, share, subscribe, and all those beautiful things. And we're going to go ahead and give kisses now. We're going to give kisses on the end of the show here, Karen. So if you want to join me, we love you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your listeners.
Absolutely. So glad that you're doing the work you're doing. And thanks to everybody for listening all the way to the end, and share it out. And we'll see you next week on Soul Nectar Show. Bye for now, everyone.
If you found even one gold nugget in this episode of Soul Nectar Show, will you do us a favor? Will you subscribe, like, and share this episode? Maybe even write a comment and let us know what you thought about it. We really, really want to engage with you at a much deeper level. Let's be part of community together. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now. To dive in deeper to nourishing conversation, visit soulnectar.show.
Soul Nectar Show. Awaken away. Soul Nectar Show. Take a sip from the drip of nectar, from the source of who you are. Soul Nectar Show. Yeah.